Hey guys, so I want to review the Mongols packet with you real quick. Just to clarify to my regular classes, the final page on this was not in your packet. And my advanced class, you should make sure you watch the video all the way to the very end, and I'll let you guys know when the split comes. So, quick review, our packet focused on the question of how barbaric were the barbarians? What level of barbarian were the Mongols? Were they complete barbarians? Were they were completely, uncivilized and savage and brutal? Were they kind of, products of their times or kind of medium barbarians? Or were they not barbaric at all? Were they just different from other cultures around them, but still as civilized as others? And so what we did was we looked at the textbook secondary source first, and we looked at the background, right? We looked at how there's three different definitions of barbarian. Barbaros is the Greek for foreigner. Remember that barbaros originally did not mean anything along the lines of that negative term that we have in our heads today. People who live beyond civilization, savage, evil, brutal. It literally just meant you are different, right? You are a foreigner. And then eventually it just changes over time. Uh, the Mongols lived in round, movable houses they called yurts. They weren't really a permanent kind of settlement. They were nomadic people. They didn't really have that permanent home. They might have been considered uncivilized due to the fact that they lived off the meat, milk, and hide of horses, not necessarily an average thing of the time. But this is all going to change. And so eventually there's going to be a boy named Temujin who's born, and he'll become Genghis Khan, the basically first emperor of the Mongolian Empire. And so he starts with attacking China. And we had this quote underlined here: slaughter was so great that the streets of the Chinese capital were greasy with human fat and flesh. This was an example of the fact that they killed so many people. And we use this as an example of, yes, they are barbarians, right? Their slaughter was so great. They killed so many people that not only were the streets, running with blood, they're actually filled with like fat and flesh of human bodies. And that's a significant factor within the idea of barbarianism. Then Genghis Khan dies. He's succeeded by one of his four sons, Ogadai. Ogadai decides to attack more along the lines of Eastern Europe. And so we see here that he has a plan, though. Then they are making examples of other cities. So, yes, while it's barbaric that men, women, and children were killed, survivors were allowed to escape. And so it's the idea of, do barbarians do this? Do barbarians kill people with a plan of, we'll make an example of this one town so that we can save ourselves future annihilation? Then Ogadai dies. Next person comes up is Monka, and he is going to be in charge of the third wave of the attacks in the Middle East. The Mongols start by annihilating the troublesome section known as the Assassins, and then we see shifting alliances, and we see people starting to create friendships with the Mongols. So despite the fact that maybe they were barbaric, Christians in the Middle East are going to treat them as allies. And so maybe along the lines of, does a barbarian create a political alliance? Eventually, the Mongolian Empire gets too large. They have to split it into four khanates or four parts. And the most famous of these is Kublai Khan's section, where he basically takes over China and creates a new empire in China. And what's interesting is a so-called barbarian creates that time of peace, that Pax Mongolica. This idea that this area of Asia was so insanely united and protected that for the very first time in 300 years, China is actually a safe place to visit. So again, that barbarianism, does it actually fit? The next source we looked at was the map, just looking at how large and organized the empire was. You can see here the different numbers of the land sizes. So obviously Genghis Khan is the largest section of land. The next page talked about that primary source from the city of Nishapur, city in Persia, where they are attacked by the Mongols. Please remember that the Mongols do destroy pretty much everyone here, and they severed the heads of the slain from their bodies and heaped them into piles, keeping those of the men separate from those of the women and children. This has been a pretty commonly missed question on your guys' tests and quizzes. You guys, they did not separate the heads of men, women, and children to show that people, yes, we know the difference between the genders and ages. They did it in order to really emphasize the fact that they didn't really care who they killed. Separating the heads is going to show people walking by that they will kill children, they will kill women. And so it's the idea of displaying this message of brutality as an example of what could happen to you if you do not obey the Mongols. You then have the very death sources here. You can see that as the Mongolian Empire gets older, meaning that, at the very start they kill about 30,000, but then the numbers increase to the point where maybe there's even no survivors. So somehow the violence increases as the Mongols gain more and more power. Now, that is where my regular classes ended. So if you're in one of my regular classes, you're good, you've done your review. Advanced class, please don't forget that you also had this extra page on the Bilik and Yasa, the two codes of conduct that rule Mongol life. And so keep in mind that these could also be used as examples of how barbarian were the barbarians. Were they civilized? Were they not? You can use these probably in your written portion if that comes down to it. So make sure that you review this page as well.